the current W-1 guest worker visa program put forward in this bill, I think it's a great step in the right direction. But I think the number one issue, and this is an issue that a lot of Republicans definitely understand, is it's not big enough. It starts off at 20,000 in 2015, goes up to 75,000 per year in 2019, and then if a new bureau called the Bureau of Labor Market Research determines that unemployment is below a certain level, they can ratchet that up to 200,000 a year. Now, 200,000 a year in these lower skilled industries is a zones 1, 2, and 3 style industries, so they don't require, a graduate degree or a college degree or anything like that. To give you an example of why I think 200,000 is inadequate per year, between the years of 2005, 6, and 7, more than 600,000 people a year successfully entered the United States as unauthorized immigrants to work in industries that these 200,000 people would be dedicated to. A lot of this immigration driven by the housing market, by the number of housing starts in the United States. So unauthorized immigrants going to work in either the construction industry directly or in industries supporting construction, things like groundskeeper, maintenance, other sort of industries related to those. So if we want to make sure that these border security triggers are met and the current unauthorized immigrants can go on and get their green card status, we need to create a larger, I think, guest worker visa program to accommodate a lot of them. Now, I think, but I want to go into some of the other portions that I think are great, and Greg touched on some of them. I mean, the most important thing, I think, is the portability, the ability for guest workers to move between employers relatively easily. They've done that by registering employers and employees. I think that's a great thing. I wrote this policy analysis in January that actually used that as an example. Looking back at the World War I guest worker visa program, which had a very similar provision in it. Basically, if you were employed as a guest worker, you could switch employers as long as the employers are registered, and then you had to tell the government after you changed jobs. Now that I think builds in labor market protections because people are more interested in looking out for their own good in the labor market as opposed to relying on government bureaucrats to look out for it for them. Some of the good things in this bill, it's a renewable guest worker visa program. It's 3 years. It's a renewable program. And it's available for greater types of sectors in the U.S. economy than are currently available for under current guest worker visa programs. One of those sectors of the economy is construction. So construction industry can get up to 15,000 of these visas per year. The construction industry was, as I said before, a big draw for unauthorized immigrants. The problem, of course, is that it's only 15,000. We had 650,000 people crossing the border in 05, 06, and 07. So I would, if I could give some advice to people working on this bill, it would be to either increase the numbers or to exempt certain types of construction workers, as many as possible, from the caps going forward, so that we can make sure that the industries that are actually employing low-skilled immigrant workers have the flexibility and can employ the numbers necessary to draw them out of the illegal market. One of the interesting things is we hear a lot of people talk about agriculture. It's certainly an important part of this. A large numbers of people in the agricultural industry in the U.S. are unauthorized immigrants or low-skilled workers. But to give you an example, only about 5% of the current number of unauthorized immigrants are actually working in agriculture. If this was the 1950s, it would be somewhere above 90%. So the industries where they are working today are different than what they were 50 or 60 years ago, and I think our visa system needs to change to reflect that. Another thing that I want to go into some more detail is some of the protectionist measures for the W visa, for this low and medium skilled worker visa. If more than 50% of the employees in one of these businesses that wants to use one of these visas are not U.S. citizens, then they have to pay, if it's between 50 and 75%, they have to pay a $1,750 sort of penalty fee. If it's greater than 75%, they have to pay a $3,500 fee. Now, this is clearly a protectionist measure that's meant to target certain American industries, certain American employers here for this type of visa. I think we can do without that going forward. One of the issues also is for employers within certain metropolitan statistical areas that have an employment rate over 8.5%, their ability to hire W visas is going to be substantially curtailed. It says basically no W visas in this broad category of employers in these areas. On its face, this probably isn't such a big deal, and goes along with what the current market system is, which is when there's a lot of unemployment, people don't hire a lot of immigrants. We saw that recently with the economic downturn. But there could be some industries in depressed areas of the country that are doing pretty well and can't find the workers they necessarily need. So that might be a problem going forward. And furthermore, I want to talk about one fallacy that's commonly stated about guest worker visa programs. And I think the best example is what Ramesh Ponnuru wrote yesterday in Bloomberg. And his piece was titled, "New Immigration Bill Has One Terrible Flaw." Now, the flaw that he pointed out was that a guest worker visa program exists in the first place. And he seems to be very concerned about a notion of equality, that we're letting people live here, work here, and contribute, but not necessarily become citizens. Well, under the current bill, it's a pretty easy path, and I think Gray can talk some more about this, but it's a pretty easy path, probably the easiest ever devised for guest workers to eventually get a green card on this system. So it's mostly a temporary thing. If they're guest worker visas, they come here, they can work for a while and eventually become citizens. But I question whether he wants millions of green cards issued per year for low-skilled immigrants coming to the United States, because that seems to be the alternative type of system that he would want to favor. We're not going to be able to, we like guest worker visas because they are or at least I do, because they are an alternative to a green card system. And we're not going to get, millions of green cards for low-skilled immigrants like, used to exist prior to the 1920s. There's also enormous numbers of other visas like the F visa, for students who come here where they're not going to be granted any kind of citizenship. But I think the most important thing we need to ask is, if you don't like guest worker visas, you don't like them compared to what? The current system, if you're a low-skilled immigrant trying to come here, or a low-skilled foreign worker, your choices are generally either come under a family system, in which case you have to be related to an American. Not a whole lot of people qualify for that. You either come in illegally or you don't come at all. Now, giving low-skilled immigrants or migrant workers another choice to come here legally, temporarily, under a guest worker visa program, I think is a much better option if we're worried about issues of equality and citizenship and things like that. More choice, I think, is an idea of more justice in our society. Also, the notion that this is guest worker visas are sort of some kind of weird aberration from Western norms, that there's either citizen or non-citizen, I think betrays an enormous ignorance and how Western countries have dealt with immigration and foreigners living amongst them for thousands of years. And I do say thousands of years literally. The Athenians had a system, a Metoikan system of guest worker visas, where people could live amongst them as guest workers, own property, and act in every way except for politically as Athenian citizens. And this is the first democracy in the world. Western civilization is said to be founded on the twin pillars of Athens and Jerusalem. So I don't really think guest workers are too far an aberration from our origins as a Western civilization. If you want to be even more specific, the British up through the Middle Ages had guest worker type systems where they allowed merchants to come in and live amongst them as less than citizens, to work in their own property. They had a system in North America called denization, which is a in-between pathway between citizenship and being an unauthorized alien. And it basically allowed you all the economic rights without any of the political rights. So I think that a guest worker visa program is consistent with our values and our history as Western civilization. It's not some weird aberration that creates an unfathomable political inequality that we just can't abide. And these criticisms mainly fall flat.